Last year, I wrote a post about why I believe in God. I've shared these reasons with others at various times. Of all the reasons I listed there, two have been by far the most controversial. One is the historical reliability of the resurrection. I plan to do another post to address that. The other objection really surprised me, though. So many people have taken issue with the idea that scholarly consensus in theology is authoritative. Scholarly consensus is hard to quantify, yet it is also a guiding principle across fields. I had a friend that put it to me like this: if you have an opinion about a field you haven't studied, then you either agree with the consensus or for all intents and purposes you're wrong. If you studied a field and you don't agree with the consensus, you're wrong unless you can win a debate with others who have studied it at a higher level than you have. Even then, you might still be wrong. If you've published your opinion in an academic journal and it was rejected by the majority of your peers, you were wrong. Only when your journal article or monograph gets picked up and quoted by the experts studying the field do you get to think that you might be right. Then you've changed the consensus. That's why I've started kinda low-key looking for someone to debate on my theory that Matthew was written in Hebrew. I see that as a fifth step towards being ready to submit my findings to an academic journal. It's also why my FAQ on the subject of accepting the Hebrew Matthew, I begin by saying, if you're not in a place to look at the evidence, I suggest that you follow the consensus. That means go with the current Nestle-Aland or United Bible Society Greek New Testament. There is always a minority opinion person out there somewhere that is ahead of the curve, but most minority opinion people are not. If you blindly follow me on Hebrew Matthew, James Snap on the long ending of Mark, and Chris Date on annihilationism, chances are good that you're following at least one of us into error. Only deeper study on all three of us would yield answers as to which. That's also why serious students of a subject with minority opinions tend not to support each other. If James Snap were to advocate for me on a quid pro quo basis, and the perfect objection to my position came out, his position on the long ending of Mark would get caught in the crossfire. That brings me to the first objection that I hear about the scholarly consensus in theology, that theology does not progress. This is false. I will admit that there are areas of theology that progress more slowly than others, but this is true in any broad area of academic study. For an easy example, the further you go back in history, the harder it is to find data, and the more recent something is, the less likely it is to have been forgotten. So the study of the very distant past and the very recent past both progress fairly slowly. But there are always new discoveries, theories, and analysis that shape our way of looking at the Middle Ages and late antiquity. There are theological debates that I don't get into. While eternal conscious torment has always been the dominant view, both annihilationism and universalism have had strong advocates since the beginning. Why am I in favor of ECT? Because it's the majority position, and I don't think I'm going to be the one to make headway in that part of the field. I do follow debates in that area when I have time. I think Chris Date is a great place to start if you're looking for an accessible academic with a minority position in that area. Similarly, I have not done a deep dive into whether the long ending of Mark was original. I think there's enough evidence to accept it as inspired regardless of its status as original or later addition, but that's an entirely separate question. James Snap has the most detailed and nuanced examination of the subject I've ever seen. Detail and nuance often go together with correct opinions, but not always. I haven't checked his facts, so I don't know if he's right. There are areas of theology that are in near constant flux and improvement, though. Canon, textual research, and textual interpretation have had fits and starts since the invention of the printing press. The current CCTM has been innovating the way people evaluate New Testament manuscripts to find the original text. We've finally reached the place where the Roman Catholic and Protestant dialogue is cool enough to really open up whether the deuterocanonical books are inspired or not. Even though the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy is less than 100 years old, that attempt to establish inerrancy has also led to a lot more discussion about the limits of inerrancy. Outside those fields which have more active development, there's been more interest in what omniscient and omnipotence and omnipresence over the last 100 years or so. While there's hardly anything approaching consensus on these points, we seem to at least be getting better at defining what they are not. Theology is no more dead than mathematics, history, or mechanics. Another objection that I've gotten on this front has been that theologians have to believe in God. This comes in various forms, and I'm going to pick the low-hanging fruit first. For some, this is tied to the idea that all theology degrees require the student to sign a statement of faith or otherwise practice Christianity. It's not true. If you're an atheist or Muslim or a neo-paganist, and you want a theology degree from a prominent university, you can get one. Yale School of Divinity does not require students to sign a statement of faith. They have been accepting students of other faiths since at least 2005, when they made changes to the food they offered for Muslim students. Harvard Divinity School has not had a religious requirement since 1909. Liberty University does not require students to sign a statement of faith. In fact, there is a review of Liberty University by a Muslim student. Regent University does not require students to adhere to their Christian faith, according to page 4 of their student handbook. And the list could keep going. Many state universities will have a religious studies degree with Christian theology, or Muslim theology, or whatever, as a specialty. So no, you can become a degree-holding theologian without believing in God just as easily as you can become a flat earth geologist or a vaccine-denying doctor. Similarly, there's no statement of faith to sign before publishing to many theology or philosophy of religion journals. So if you really think there's an atheist that has a knockdown case for atheism, suggest that they start submitting it to a journal. See how the experts in the field handle their argument. The other way that the people seem to intend the sentiment that theologians have to believe in God is more along the lines that only those who believe in God would go into theology. More like if you didn't believe in it, you would just not study it. This attitude has two major flaws. The first is that people study things they believe to be fiction all the time. People still study alchemy and the texts associated with it. They don't think it works, but they find the mind of the people who did fascinating. People study folklore from various places around the world. They don't believe in it, but they find the people who did believe compelling. Lots more examples could be given, but I think the point is made. Past that, theologians lose their faith, but continue to publish in the field. Bart Ehrman is a prime example of this. He's a whole topic all his own, but I'm painting with a very broad brush so as not to get too watered down in the details. We find similar things in the history of other fields of deep study. Antoine Lavoisier was upset that oxygen sometimes reacted in a ratio of 1:1 and other times reacted in a ratio of 2:1. Auguste Kekulé was upset that he was having difficulty finding the structure of benzene. There are always going to be those who are scandalized by the conflicts they find in the system they study. Breakthroughs come when people push through those conflicts to find solutions. That's one reason why I like to listen to atheist theologians. I suspect that some of our breakthroughs will come in the areas that they are most troubled. Since so many of them struggle with the problem of evil, I do put a bit of my thought there. Although I don't share their intuitions regarding the problem, so I don't expect to find the solution. The other problem with saying that theology will be studied primarily by theists is that, in areas of deep study, when a basic understanding is wrong, it is usually the top of that field that find it and change the course of beliefs in the field. It was physicists that discovered that Newtonian gravity had flaws and fixed it. It was a group of alchemists that broke away and started chemistry. The objection that comes in then is that if theologians and pastors admitted that they don't believe in God any longer, then they would be out of a job. The median wage for pastors in America is $55,500 as of May 2022. Becoming a serious theologian isn't a get-rich-quick scheme, and it is an area of deep thought and consideration. Most pastors are giving up opportunities for higher-paying jobs to be pastors, not the other way around. While I would love to see breakthroughs in the areas that bother burned-out clergy, I find it compelling that even after decades of study so many stay in the field, and even those who leave for a while often return once they've had some rest. That's not what we see when the foundation of a field of study is fiction. In that case, we see people enter the field thinking it's true, then converting to the notion that it's not quickly and often. Practicing modern pagans that enter the academic study of the classics tend to stop believing in pagan deities. I'm a big believer in trusting expertise. I love listening to experts in all kinds of fields, but there are fields that interest me more than others. I enjoy physics, even though I don't have the math chops to contribute to that field. Recently, CERN completed a study about how antimatter responds to gravity. My prediction beforehand was that it would respond just like matter. However, I knew what the theories being tested were. Preliminary results are consistent with it falling exactly like matter, but it's definitely to one side of normal. While I still suspect that further research will result in observations more consistent with matter and antimatter responding exactly the same to gravity, I was surprised that the measurements were as far off the mark as they were. While I am pretty sure of this, if things keep being to one side, then the reality lead to advancements in physics. Rather than throwing the field out when it doesn't work as expected, consensus will change, and people will trust that new consensus. People should treat their theological opinions the same way. If you really do have a thought about theology that's not part of the scholarly consensus, then sharpen it until you can publish. Challenge the consensus, then publish, then try to change the consensus. That's what I'm doing. That's what Chris Date is doing. That's what James Snap is doing. If you aren't doing that, then for all intents and purposes you're just wrong.